episode 60. You are listening to the new Glam Gal Podcast, the podcast where style meets confidence. Conquer the frustration of trying on clothes and learn to dress and love the body you are in. There are no size or weight requirements here. I'm your host, Miss J. Join me, won't you? Hey Glam Gals, welcome back to the podcast. We are closing out the summer, our back to school special, and we're ushering fall. And in honor of that, I wanted to cover one of the old wives' tales. It used to be a fashion rule, and then it became sort of a myth and something we giggle about. But some of you may still be wondering, can I wear white after Labor Day? The simple answer is yes. But I love a bit of fashion history, and I love when fashion history has a little bit of mythos around it. So I wanted to give you a little peek into how this became a rule in the first place. You may not know, especially for those of you listening in other countries, Labor Day is an American holiday. It marks the end of the summer and the transition to the fall. Now, originally, Labor Day was a peaceful protest. It took place on September 5th, 1882, with the first Labor Day parade. They say there were 10,000 people peacefully marching in New York City. After that, a series of protests followed. The protests resulted in some deaths. This was in May of 1886. So when Congress finally decided to designate Labor Day, they wanted to steer away from May and instead chose the first Monday in September. This was passed June 28th, 1894. So here's where the fashion mythos sort of comes into play. Some fashion historians say that the rule against wearing white after Labor Day was created by snobby elitists who were trying to prevent the nouveau riche, recently made millionaires, and other upstarts from trying to join their ranks. Because you see, the wealthy were able to get out of the cities during the summertime. So they could put away their clothing that was usually darker in color, instead for white resort wear, or white clothing that signified that they could afford leisure wear and beat the heat. Now, if you've ever been to New York City in the summertime, you know not only is it hot, it is humid. So these fashion elitists had something in mind. Not only did white signify their class, but it also was actually practically cooler. Now, some historians actually deny that this is the case. They say that the rule barring no white after Labor Day is simply an excuse to blame elitists for everything, including this fashion rule. And they believe that actually it's something more practical. That why would you wear white clothing and white shoes when you're returning to work, you're returning to a factory, you're returning to a big city, and you would really just muck up your white clothing upon your return to work and school in a big city. So white clothing, white shoes, white tennis shoes, white pumps, white linen garments would be actually impractical. Furthermore, Labor Day actually shows a transition to fall when you'd be wearing warmer clothing, at least presumably. Again, if you've ever been in New York City in September, the humidity and the heat has not necessarily gone away. But nonetheless, Labor Day sort of marks this transition to the fall. Now that you know some of the history behind can you wear white after Labor Day, the simple answer is yes. Yes, of course you can. And I wanted to bring this up, not necessarily to talk about fashion rules, as whether you should keep them or not, because I'm of the mindset that no, you don't have to obey any fashion rules. I think that's sort of an outmoded way of thinking about fashion and style in general. I do appreciate fashion history, and I love learning about the mythos surrounding some of these rules. I love the idea that a set of people can make up a rule They have power and influence over people who produce the garments themselves. Couple that with advertising executives, social media, good branding, and we have what we call fashion fads or current styles. I love how this sort of machine works because it really taps into the human heart and mind. And that's the only reason any of it really works, because at the end of the day, we're talking about heaps of fabric stitched together with other heaps of fabric. There's no real power in and of itself. It's the humans with their thoughts and their feelings and their actions that create fashion empires. It's the humans themselves that create fashion rules that other humans decide to obey or not to obey. And I love that part of fashion rules and fashion history. And I want all of you to be amused, to find it fun, to find it playful, and to decide for yourselves with your human heart and your human mind what you choose to do or not do. What fashion rules will you choose to adopt for yourself? Which ones will you create for yourself? Which ones will you ignore as outmoded or passé? I know some women who feel very strongly about fast fashion and prefer slow making their own clothing. I know some ladies who feel very strongly about upcycling garments and only buying secondhand because of the amount of waste that garments produce. And ultimately, I say to each their own. You always get to decide, but I want you to like your reasons. Are you choosing to adhere to a quote-unquote fashion rule because you're feeling an amount of shame, because you too want to be upwardly mobile and think that if you follow this fashion rule, you can blend in with a more elite crowd? Or are you choosing to adhere to a fashion rule because you really just don't want to get your white shoes dirty when you go to work? Do you see the difference? So, my darling glam gals, your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to kind of start thinking about what fashion rules you've been following. And if you like your reasons. Are you trying to be upwardly mobile and compete with others? Or you simply don't want to get your shoes dirty? What fashion rules have you created for yourself? Have you stopped thinking of all of this as fun? And you're adhering to a playbook written by somebody else from 100 years ago? I would encourage you to have fun with all of this. These are heaps of fabric sewn onto other heaps of fabric. No magical abilities other than the thoughts and the feelings that you, the human, the wearer, have about all of it. All right. I want to close out this by offering you a free consultation. If you're following some fashion rules or just have a question as to whether the rule is still in play, feel free to reach out at judithgaton.com and click on the button to work with me. All right, let's get it, Glam Gals. Miss J out.